All right. So welcome everyone. Today is Thursday, February 6, 2020 for the Helm developer call. For anyone who has not seen these recordings or has not been here before, how we go about it is that we start off with announcements for the week, anything that's happened in the past week. We go through stand-ups for the Helm core maintainers and any community members that want to give a stand-up as well. And then we go through any discussion items for the week that were thrown on the agenda before or anything that's come up during stand-up. And then afterwards, we go through assignments for the next week. So in terms of announcements that we have for this week, on the, I'll actually post the link in the document here. Oh, thanks, Farina, for already going and doing that. We have sessions scheduled for KubeCon EU. Bridget, you have this discussion item. You want to talk about this for a second?
Yeah, thanks to Karen Chu, we got those scheduled. So Reinhard and I will be doing the intro, and Scott Rigby and Paul Cesarski will be doing the deep dive.
Yay, that's fantastic. Is there any other announcements that we have for this week? Going once, going twice. All right. So Matt Farina, do you want to go first with stand-up this week?
Sure. So I've been working a lot on triaging the issue queue and pull requests and things like that. There were actually a couple of new bugs that came in, and I did pull requests against them today. They're actually both small fixes that came out in 3.0.3. I put them into the 3.1.0 because there's tests and they're both small or extra small. I've also been poking around at the fact that our website can do translations now. So helm.sh, hey, we can have different languages up there. There's a mock-out for Chinese. Specifically, I'm figuring this out so I can start to get folks pointed at the Korean versions of the docs, but there is that as well. So that's kind of what I've been focusing on. There hasn't, I don't think anything new come into the Helm Hub, which surprises me. It's the first time in a while. But if you actually go look at the number of orgs over in the Helm Hub, you can go to the charts page, just keep scrolling down and see the number. It's kind of fascinating how many places have done that. And so that's kind of what I've been, I did a little bit of triaging on the www repo as well. That's it for me. So I'll hand it off to Mark.
All right. I've posted a PR to have the memory driver that we use mostly for testing to support namespaces. That wasn't done before. Once that's approved, if approved, I want to post I've discussed it with Fisher a while ago. I want to be able to do preloading of releases in the memory driver so that we can run stubs, so that I can do acceptance testing. So that's something. I've also posted a proposal and a full PR for auto-completion for plugins. Whenever somebody has time, there's no urgency. And besides that, I'm gonna work on Cobra to get some of the stuff Helm does for auto-completion down to Cobra, like I mentioned before. Adam.
Hey everybody, it's been a little while. I'm just getting back into it. I took a little break from Helm for December and January, so I don't have anything to report other than I'm gonna start catching up. Go Mark.
Hi. So one bug fix around the SHAs when you're using v2 lock files. So that was merged in, so thanks for the reviews on that. And also a feature that had been out there about being able to use the release name when you're doing a template in the output directories. So that's merged in as well. And apart from that, was over at config management camp in Ghent with Taylor. So we did a talk around Helm. So yeah, it was interesting catching up with some of the infra people and their different nuances around configure management tools. Some like YAML, some like JSON, some like none of them, and also around their likes for Kubernetes, for Helm, and not for Kubernetes, and not for Helm. So there you go. So it was a wide variety. So I'll hand over next to Fisher, I think.
Sure. So I basically, what I've been doing this week is I was doing a little bit of work on the Helm website, taking a look at the Helm command documentation. Someone mentioned in an issue that some of the Helm 2 commands snuck into the Helm command documentation. So I just kind of went through there and made sure that we had the up-to-date information for the Helm commands. So just basically purging out the stuff and making sure that we have like Helm env, Helm show, and all that kind of stuff. Ronan and I are kind of still working together on what's the best path forward for some of those commands that were either renamed or deprecated, like say Helm home and whatnot, because a lot of people will search up those commands on the Helm documentation, and getting a 404 link might not be the best solution for them. So just kind of figuring out what do we want to do in those situations where we say, do we want to have a document that says, this command no longer exists in Helm 3. If you want, go to the Helm 2 documentation for Helm 2, or like here's the superseded command for this. So we're kind of going through those scenarios and figuring out.
We have like a deprecated section.
Yeah, exactly. So we're working through that. And then the other thing as well is I've been going through some of the bigger ticket items, mostly around, like, say there was the lookup function that happened last week. So I was reviewing that and kind of testing that and seeing if it could solve a couple of use cases. And I think one of the discussion items around here is around the release namespace creation. So we'll get to that eventually. But then there was also some other pull requests and some other suggestions around, I can't exactly remember, but I've been working on high level stuff to see where we could go from there. So I think for the next week, we'll be focusing mostly on 3.1 stuff and how we get that through so we can go with the 3.1 release. Let's pass off to Taylor.
Hi, everyone. I've just been doing that config management camp with Martin. That was great. There's some cool demos that came out of it if you like advanced Helm things to do. I now have my advanced Helm demos repo that's under my username. That has some stuff like data collection using Helm SDK and all sorts of things. So anyway, go check it out if you're interested. Mostly working around finishing up post runner stuff, which we're going to talk about in the discussion. So I will leave it for there. And then I'm getting including that talk for DevOps Days in Guadalajara. And that's going to be about just a kind of retrospective on the Helm 3 release and what we learned and what people could learn from our mistakes and things we did well. So I'm going to talk, that's going to be, like I said, in Spanish, but hopefully still useful out there for the community to have a good retrospective. So that is it for me. I will pass it off to Butcher.
I got here just a minute late. Did we have any announcements about the progress on Helm for TOC review? Because that's the main thing I've been working on.
We did not, so please tell us.
All right, so the main thing I've been working on with assistance from various people in this room have been to try and get our final case made for the TOC so that we can graduate. Last week, I think it was last Friday, Matt Farina and I went through a couple of the open tasks. So right now I am researching security assurance cases, which would give us CII silver badge status on our compliance. And then the other one that is outstanding is the markdown document that contains a list of companies that are using Helm. The wording in the TOC requirements imply that it's supposed to be all the people who are using Helm. However, I don't think that's going to happen, but it would be a good thing to get a good solid list of companies. And so I have a PR open for that. And I don't know if it's best to, my original proposal had been that I would open the PR and people could use the GitHub recommendation tool to add their own companies in, and then we could merge a whole bunch of them at once. However, that's proving to not be a terribly efficient way of doing things. Josh got a suggestion in, and I forget who else. I think Martin might have gotten one in. And then I started discovering that what happens is if you don't manually paste in a sign off, then the DCO bot blocks it. So Martin had signed his and Josh hadn't, and so it was like, oh, come on. So I think it's probably better to just merge it in as is, and then just have people contribute from there. But we might need to make a little bit. It's 1 second, Matt. We might need to make a little bit of a concerted effort in Slack and stuff like that to encourage people to add their companies there. I figure really as soon as we hit about 10, then we're okay. But until then, it doesn't look terribly compelling to the TOC, even though they know that we're at literally thousands of organizations that use Helm. Yeah, Farina?
I was going to say two things. One, there is a browser plugin that can automatically add the DOC signing for you, and I can point you to it. Scott Rigby is the one who created it. We use it over on the chart side all the time. And the other thing, just so folks are aware, the reason he's going after this security thing for the silver, no graduated project has a silver badge yet, and that is the only requirement we don't meet for silver.
Yeah.
So it'll look really good if we went in with that.
Yeah, we already met all the rest of them. And then the last thing is, so I've been helping triage issues and review PRs and stuff, and wanted to particularly call out Martin for that fix on the SHAs for Helm 2 dependencies. That was tricky, and thanks for working that one through, because that one was full of little fiddly bits that I don't think you realized you were signing up for when doing that first version. So thanks for doing that one. Anybody else left to go?
I put myself on the list, but I don't really have anything to add other than just getting the session scheduled for KubeCon EU was good, and we'll move forward on that. I guess none of the other people who are doing the sessions are on this call, but we are in good shape there. Back to you, Fisher.
All right, thanks, Bridget. It's actually just core maintainers this time. This is a fun meeting. So we have discussion items for today. So let's go through the first one. So Matt Farina, do you want to kick off this discussion about cutting the 3.1 RC?
Sure. We still have 13 open things. We're at 82% complete, but we have 60 things closed, right? So there's a lot that's been closed. I think we're kind of at the point where it's time to move some of these out into the 3.2 milestone, or if there are bugs, we could move them in later. But some of these, I think it's time to just move them out and to get going on this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, some of the things would be nice to have. Maybe we should do one more evaluation after this dev call, and then we can sync up on Helm Dev to figure out if there's anything. But from the last time I looked at this, I think all the bugs that we wanted to immediately address or regressions that happened in the last release have been addressed now. So I think most of the things can probably be punted over to 3.2 at this point, and we should be moving it sooner than later.
Yeah, I would like the gap between 3.1 and 3.2 to be a lot smaller than the gap between 3.0 and 3.1. A quarter's too long.
So if you're suggesting that, then it sounds like we should be able to pick a date relatively soon for 3.1 and then project, say, the few weeks or month that we want for 3.2. Even if we don't end up sticking to that, it sounds like we should at least think about what dates we want.
Well, let me ask this real quick. When is the EU conference? What are the dates of that?
It's March 30th to April 2nd or something like that, right at the end of March, beginning of April.
Okay. We should get 3.2 out the door released before the conference. That's what I would target.
Agreed. And if we are going to do that, then we would want it to be probably a week before the conference if we want to get some news cycle before the giant conference news dump, which means we want that release to be either the week of March 16th or the week of March 23rd. The week of March 23rd is right up against the conference, so we do stand the risk of hitting the giant conference news cycle. I think if we shoot for the week of March 16th, even if we overshoot, then we won't land in the conference week.
I would target the 18th.
Okay.
And then that means our release candidate would want to get out no later than the 11th.
Okay.
And so since we're already at the 6th, could we shoot for getting the release candidate out maybe tomorrow? That's what I'd like to shoot for. Really triage and go through these things, and then we'll have a much shorter cycle for 3.2. Does that sound good for everyone?
I think that's reasonable for my time frame. Monday, Tuesday next week, I'm flying out for a conference, so I'll be unavailable to help out during those 2 days, but I can help out on Friday for sure and today.
I mean, we can get the release candidate out, and I can carve out time to iterate on that if needed and send it out to the list. Unless somebody else wants to handle doing that stuff, I'm fine with whatever.
Yeah, that sounds like a reasonable time frame, because I mean, that means tomorrow, and if we get for a 3.1 release next week, that gives us 1, 2, 3, about 4 weeks from the time to the 3.2 RC. And if I'm not mistaken, most of the stuff in 3.2 at this point are things that are kind of tailing over from 3.1, which means that we already are quite familiar with most of the things that are in the 3.2 timeline, or at least most of them have been slated for 3.2. So I think a shorter time frame this time around will be more than reasonable.
Okay.
Okay, so release candidate 3.1 tomorrow, and release for 3.1. We were thinking like another mid next week, or?
Yeah, I think that gives us enough time to release and make sure that there's enough time between the RCs. I mean, like Adam's suggestion last couple of releases ago, which is if we don't find any bugs, the community doesn't find any bugs in the RC over a certain time frame, then we should just release it. And that seems quite reasonable for if we release an RC, make a big noise about it over the weekend, give them a few more business days to figure that out, and then release it. I think that's more than fair.
I ideally would think next Thursday would be a great day if we don't find too many bugs to get it out the door, because I wouldn't want to release it on a Friday.
Yeah. All right, February 13th is our tentative release candidate, or our release candidate. Sorry, tentative release date for 3.1 then. Sounds great.
Thanks, Bridget. All right. So next discussion item is Taylor. We've got a sync up on post render. Do you want to kick that one off?
Yes, there was just one outstanding issue around where things should be at. I initially created things so that if you installed a binary into your plugins directory, which a lot of plugins do, that then you can, that when you use post render, it'll search that path by default. And there was some confusion on the discussion for is something wanted to keep or not. So mainly Farina and Butcher. So let's get through that really quick so I can tidy up whatever needs to be tidied up and get that thing merged for 3.1.
Okay, so here's what it was for me. I'm looking at this going, in a comment somewhere it said this is for one-off scripts, right? Not to be used every time. And that was a little confusing because why would you need to share a one-off script via a plugin for your whole team and things like that? And so I was trying to understand the use case here on when it would be used, why we would distribute it in a plugin, what's kind of the use case. There was some lack of clarity.
Yeah, so around the thing with plugins is plugin with post renders, they're not necessarily meant to be used every time by every single release you would do. But generally, when a release uses one, they will continue using that same one for the last. They don't need to add that on with post-render stuff anymore.
Now, one point I'd like to put in on that too is, and I think your questions on it, Farina, as well, was, it is, and I think Butcher answered as well, there are ways of using this to shoot yourself in the foot, for want of a better word. But I think this is where you have to take a bit of responsibility if you're going to use this capability. And I'm not sure it's a good idea to restrict its ability. And what I mean by that is if you plug something in there and use it, then I think, you have to be responsible, and it's not exactly Helm's responsibility after that.
No. My thing was getting into the cross-platform a little bit. So in the cross-platform setup, you might have a setup for Mac, Linux, and then Windows if you're going to distribute this. Because some of our teams, there's those of us out there who use Mac, Linux, and Windows in your development environments. And so if you don't have the plugin name, it's just a binary in there, right? How do we go forward? And I'm fine with distributing it as a plugin. I just would like to somehow have a future path where we use the cross-platform features of plugins in order to make it possible to specify a post render. That's all I was really getting at. Does that make sense? Is everybody aware that plugins have cross-platform capabilities? So you can have it do one command for Mac, another for Linux, and even another for Windows.
Yeah, I think to keep it simple, the idea was that people might need to distribute these in some way that's like in a common thing they already probably have support and knowledge for. So I'm going to go ahead and just for now, I'm going to pull out commented out so that people know like we want to add this support later, because I don't think it's necessary to have it right now, but it'd be nice to maybe have it hook into the plugin system as a feature enhancement.
Oh, I definitely think so. I just don't want it to be haphazard. That's the only thing that I wanted. I want to set up a good pattern for this so it's not haphazard. And I'll even help write the code or work on it. I just want to make sure we set a good precedent.
I think what I'll do is I'm just going to go here after lunch today, and I'm going to go in and comment that out with a comment describing what we want to do with it as a future enhancement, and then update the documentation, have both those pushed up, and we should be able to get the final review and merge today.
Okay. Yeah. And remember, when we move on to the next step of this, I'm totally willing to help.
I'll just take it, Fisher, since I have the second one here.
Before we go on to that, I'm just making sure we have 4 minutes before. Can we quickly just go through assignments? Just to make sure that we have that in there. I can do notes for the next week. Does anyone want to take on moderator?
I can do moderator.
Thanks, Martin. Okay, now back to you, Taylor.
Okay, so the issue here is issue 6794. This is the proposal, fairly detailed proposal with an implementation PR on adding back in namespace creation support, like auto namespace creation support to Helm. I think the mechanism that it's doing, which I think is more declarative than what we had before, where you could specify a namespace in your release and that thing would be in your chart. And if a namespace is specified in the chart, it will automatically install it first before it does any sort of other validation. I feel like that's a really good middle ground that overcomes some of our problems with why we were concerned about having an auto namespace creation in the first place. But I want to make sure we're on the same page before we say we're okay with this and have people look at the proposal.
So I do have a comment on this, because I realized in the Helm 2 setup, it was on the application operator, the person who installs it, the consumer for the namespace creation. By pushing it to something that's in the chart, then you're moving it to the application distributor, the person who's creating the chart rather than the installer. And so you're switching the roles or personas, especially in a distributed environment. So you're moving it from whoever grabs something off the Helm Hub and installs it to whoever's creating the package for the Helm Hub. And if you talk about a lot of things up on the Helm Hub, it's going to be very inconsistent on who's going to do this and how they're going to go about doing it, because we've really switched roles and expectations here. And so for me, that's the big thing that I notice in this change.
Yeah, and that was something that, so the pull request where I was looking at the lookup functionality, that's what I was pointing out with that specific proof of concept, because I could accomplish that exact same use case that person had suggested as a proof of concept. However, Matt Farina's point about it switching the roles over and saying that you have to declare it inside of a template in order to create that namespace, instead of before it would be created when, as the user wanting to consume that role has not been, that particular role has not been fixed by this PR. It's the same role in a different way. So in my opinion, to bring back to the actual discussion or the item itself, what should we do with item number 6794? I think because the lookup functionality is identical to what that person had suggested, and the functionality that's inside of there, I think we should be actually closing that out, because that already is functionally available in 3.1. The actual issue that Matt Farina is bringing up, and also the point of the original issue, which is enabling release namespace creation when you want it to be created, that's another discussion item, and I don't think there's a PR out there that actually resolves that yet. The only thing that we've found so far is that namespace auto provision thing in Kubernetes, and that's a server-side functionality an annotation, if I remember. But some people want it to be available inside of Helm. So I think that's a further discussion to be having later on. But that particular PR, I think we should just go ahead and close. Farina?
Would anybody be opposed to me doing a flag that would automatically create the namespace if it didn't exist? It would be an opt-in flag.
I'm fine with opt-in flag. Because based on what I'm seeing on that proposal and the feedback from the community, because it has been very actually cordial for being an open source project and people talking about it. And based on that response, I'm thinking that maybe as good of a technical decision it might have been, it might not have been the best decision for the users. And so I feel having flag gives us a good option there. But I think it should be discussed on that proposal, and we should probably close out the PR for the reasons that Fisher specified.
Adam, you had your hand raised. I just want to make sure you got your voice heard.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate one more time. It was a very much desired feature that we limit releases to a namespace. So I don't think we want to go back on that, but having an opt-in, I think, would be fine. But specifying the default, a lot of people requested to be able to limit it to namespace. And when installing into a specific namespace that wasn't there, you would want the error message. You don't want to just create namespaces just like, kube control. So I say with an opt-in, it would be fine. It does kind of break our model of a chart and the way we defined it as being installable into specific namespaces. So just start breaking that out, then you run into all sorts of security stuff again. So I just think we want to be really cautious about it. But having an opt-in, like, okay, if you know what you're doing with it, then I think.
Karina, did you just want to drop your comment in then on that proposal, and then Fisher?
Yeah, I've got it.
That. I think because you've been talking about that lookup thing, if you want to link to that comment and close out his original PR that implements that proposal and saying this is already covered, what's here is covered by lookup, and then I think we'll be in a good state. So we'll have the proposal open the discussion and we kind of have a path forward. So I'm good with that if everyone else is.
Okay, so we're at 10:02, so we are over time, but we still have 3 more discussion items on the list. Do we want to go through them today, or do we want to push through to the next meeting? I think we can still go through them if everyone's okay with that. All right, so if anyone needs to drop off, they're more than welcome to. But the first one here is, can never pronounce his first name correctly, Maurer? But Maurer and Martin, there's a plugin, Helm plugin utils. They want to propose to move to the Helm organization. So Martin, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I don't think Maurer could make it on because it's not a good time zone for him. So I'll just speak on his behalf. So I was just putting, I put in a new feature in, just extended the APIs the last day to enable passing cube context and cube file on the fly. And he just mentioned to me after review, would it be a good time to bring the lib into the Helm org? So I'm just floating it there. What do people think? Will I send a mail around to the maintainers list and get a vote on it, or what's your opinions, basically?
So my opinion on this, I think it would be fantastic to have this in. I think any kind of community project that helps out on Helm is great. The one thing that I did want to note, though, is that this does seem to be a plugin that only works with Helm 2 because it connects to Tiller and whatnot. So I'm wondering if there's a way that we could make it a little bit more clear in, say, the README or the description to say that this is plugin utilities for a Helm 2 plugin, as opposed to like a Helm 3 plugin. That's the only feedback that I have. Otherwise, great. Farina?
Well, I was also going to notice, and I can comment on the repo, there is no license on it, so it's not open source. And so before we can consider using this, it needs to be open sourced and get a nice Apache 2 license in there. I'll make a comment on the repository about it, but that is the one thing I notice about it.
That's a good catch, Matt. I didn't actually check for the license on that. Oops, because we use it in the plugin. So yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, so if you want to send after those two things kind of like are addressed, if you want to send a question to the mailing list with you and Maurer, then we can move forward with that one. So good to go.
Okay, thank you.
Mark, you have Helm M showing XDG paths. So I'm assuming that this is about this particular pull request 6892?
That's right. So you tried to revive it. I'm glad that Adam is here. The idea, just fundamentally, the issue is that the XDG paths get default values when they're not set. And it's difficult to know what those default values are because you can't just do an echo on the variable. The variable is not set. This is why I was trying to get Helm to help out a little bit and say, okay, what are because the paths are different on Mac and on Windows and on Linux. So that's the goal of the PR, is to have Helm specify to users and plugins where is the actual XDG path. There was some concerns on it. I wanted to see if we can resolve it, or again, just revive the discussion on the PR.
Okay. I have 2 cents on this. Nobody should be surprised. XDG is definitely a system, and it's a spec, and it's not a Helm thing. But on a practical level, working with it means, how do I get these things? How do I know what the defaults are? How do I know what's going on, right? It becomes one of those things where, as a user, trying to debug this stuff and trying to figure out what's going on, it's difficult. So I would suggest we add it in, not because it's right, but because it makes our lives easier. And that's my 2 cents. Adam.
My only concern with this is XDG is specific to Unix Linux. It is not the standard for Windows or Mac. So my concern is only calling it XDG. I think a much better approach would be like config root directory, or calling it like out as what it is, like config directory. Like this is where the config root is, or this is where the data root is. Calling it XDG, it's not XDG. So I don't want to mislead people in that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So yeah, the XDG standard itself is Linux specific. However, that's just an implementation detail, more or less. So what you're suggesting is that instead, in the plugins, when we inject them, we'll just say like Helm config home or Helm cache home or something along those lines that make it clear that this is a cache directory for the plugin, but not necessarily it's XDG in the name.
Yeah, just drop home also.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So it'd be like Helm config directory. And that would be the root, which would be your XDG config home. Just because on Mac, they don't call it XDG. In Windows, it isn't. There's certain directories that kind of fit XDG, so that's what's been applied to it. But I would just be careful of calling it something that it's not.
So if I understand correctly, if I set my XDG variables on Mac, I think they'll take effect, at least for Helm.
Yeah, you can definitely set them. But because you don't want to like export XDG, because XDG, if you export it within an application where it's not set on the OS level, then that's going to interfere with any sub-processes. So if you're on a system where XDG is not set, and say you run Helm End and dump it as like a source, then you're going to override any sort of OS level variables that are set. Yeah, for you.
Well, this brings in all kinds of complications. So plugins can have multiple directories, right? So say somebody wants to have a Linux container where they have 2 path locations. One is to some other location that's a main, one that's part of the container, and another part of whoever the user is, right? And so you've got 2 locations. There's actually an issue about this in the queue somewhere. And you've got both those locations. So now I want to set a path where I can say, oh, set it to the home location, the existing one, and this other one. Well, how do I actually get a path that's got both, right? I know I can set something XDG path separator, or I can, or plugins with a path separator, but how do I get the actual path that I inject as the second one so that it all works, right? Like the ability to do this on a practical level doesn't work today.
I didn't quite follow that.
Okay, maybe it's something we should take offline because we're so far after, but the ability to do some of the things we want to do with like multiple path separators, it practically doesn't work today. And so I do think we need to revisit the user experience on this. You talk about displaying it in different ways for different operating systems to make it clear. I think there's some actual use cases that we can get into that we need to solve, but this is probably something that just generally needs to be revisited.
Trina, I wouldn't mind talking through your use cases there, just offline.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I think the action item here on this one is that we're going to follow up offline. Adam and Farina, you two are going to have a little conversation over there. And then I think that gives us a good path forward for this particular PR. Good.
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, and then the last one here, we've got an update on the -- name flag mark, 7345.
Yeah, it's just for out of concern for the original poster. We discussed it and then we didn't finish it. So the idea was to add back the -- name flag. Farina realized that a lot of READMEs do point to that flag, so we kind of agreed to add it. Then it was, should it be hidden, should it not? And we kind of stopped. So out of concern for the person who posted the PR, I just wanted to revive it.
I think we had consensus about hiding the flag because
We all did.
that handles the like README copy and paste thing, but then it doesn't make it very prominent to the user that they should be using the name flag because they should be using the positional argument. So
yeah, the maintainers all agreed. The original poster seemed to think it was too, what did he call it, parental. So I'm new to this, so you guys just go ahead and say, no, that's what we wanted. And
yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's really up to the core maintainers to say that if we have a consensus in saying that this seems to be the right design for the project, then we can move forward and say that this is the right design. I think if there's a big amount of pushback from the community saying that this is the poor design and we have to go and revisit that, then that's fantastic. But if it's just the one community member having a difference in opinion between the two, but there's a large amount of core maintainers that are all saying we should hide the flag, then I think that is enough consensus to say we should move forward with that design. So
okay.
Yeah,
I'm the only one that answered him, so that's why I wasn't sure.
Okay. Yeah, I think we should push back from the community member and say, hey, I think we all discussed this, and I think the right design decision forward is to hide the flag. And then if they say that they don't want to do that, then I don't know what we can do at that point, but I think that's the right design decision going forward. I don't think we should be having two different ways of setting the same thing prominently in the help documentation. That will confuse people, but it'll also solve the exact same problem, which is the use case of whole bunch of READMEs with a -- name flag in there. So if we hide it, then people continue to use it. So.
Perfect, thank you.
Alrighty, that is all the discussion items for this week. And we have assignments for next meeting, so we're all good here for this week. So see you all next week. Bye, everyone.